Honourable Damien O'Connor.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I acknowledge that member and his initiative, I suppose, to bring to this House a bill that will receive the support of Labor, and I'm sure the vast majority of the members in this House, Mr Speaker. But before we rush away and pat one another on the back, ourselves on the back, saying how good we are to rush out and protect the animals of this country, we should think carefully about some of the principles involved in the process and in what we're trying to do here. There is no doubt that we all want to protect animals in this country. And this bill brings into place a penalty for what we will call the willful ill treatment of animals. And no one wants to see that, particularly a country that is built on its reputation and its competency and its compassion for animal management through our farming systems, through our domestic situations where we have always appreciated, utilised and protected the animals, particularly those, of course, who need our protection. And it is the job of this House to do that. Mr Speaker, we will pass this. We will hopefully in doing so maintain our reputation as a country that upholds the highest standards of animal welfare in the world, because we need to do that, as my colleague Mr Anderson said, to be able to go out and sell food with integrity to the world. But in doing so, Mr Speaker, we are going through an interesting process. Firstly, this bill assumes that increasing penalties will change behaviour. Well, we can't guarantee that. And we are effectively doubling the penalties for ill treatment of animals. And that should be so. But however, as has been pointed out, the policing of the law, the existing law or the new one that we will bring into place, will be the key issue if we are to see a change of behaviour. And we need to ensure that does occur. There's no doubt about that. The reality that ill treatment of animals is connected to the ill treatment of humans, to abuse, has been well documented. And so preventing this kind of behaviour, ill treatment of animals, is crucial for any fair and just society, because we don't want to see that happen to our fellow human beings either. But I can't help reflect, Mr Speaker, on a situation in this House probably 2 years ago, I'm not quite sure, where we struggled as a parliament to condone the hitting of people, where many people in this House stood up and made bizarre statements that said we should uphold the right to hit a child. Yet we are all quite rightfully condemning the hitting of animals unjustly, and we should do. But let's not get too ecstatic about this. Let's just think back and say, if we are to double the penalties for anyone ill-treating an animal, why then did so many people object to penalties for ill-treating children? Mr Speaker, I can't understand that hypocrisy that this Parliament, that for the most part can make wise and just decisions, can introduce this bill, and I support it, and Labor does too, yet not too long ago in this House we couldn't condemn the ill treatment of children. Well, Mr Speaker, I wouldn't say too much about this, Mr Garrett. I wouldn't say too much about it. I think we should just reflect on that and move on, because no one in this House wants to see the ill treatment of any animal or human who is not able to defend themselves. And that's what we're doing here. But let's just be reminded that it takes more than penalties and more than a quick introduction into Parliament of a bill that is populist, because most of New Zealand think it's right, because sometimes we don't always make the best judgments. Mr Speaker, it is important that the government backs this change in legislation with better policing. 5 people throughout this country to monitor and ensure that this new legislation is upheld is not sufficient. And just remind ourselves that the doubling of penalties without proper policing won't change behaviour. Mr. Speaker, we are, as I said before, a country dependent upon the wise management and the good welfare of our animals, Mr. Speaker. There will no doubt be points raised in this debate about the treatment of hens or the treatment of sows or the possible treatment of cows. We do rely, Mr. Speaker, and I think the process is a sound one for an agricultural nation, on the National Animal Welfare Advisory Committee. And my experience as Minister in dealing with that group of people, they are very fair people. They uphold the highest standards of ethics in terms of animal welfare and management, Mr. Speaker. They do have to address the difficult issues in the balance between economic parameters around animal management and the ethical parameters around animal welfare. I think they do a good job, Mr. Speaker, and I'm not wanting to bring into the debate those issues, although I'm sure that they will be raised. Mr. Speaker, I think it is important in the House to say to judges who will be dealing with this new piece of legislation that they have had the tools in front of them for some time to impose higher penalties. They've not always used them, and it's not for me to make judgment on their judgments, but they perhaps should look at the situation, Mr. Speaker, and get the message that we cannot tolerate the kinds of animal welfare abuse that we've seen in recent times. Perhaps, Mr. Speaker, it's a reflection of society, the pressure on society, on individuals, on families, and that their reaction is to take it out on animals. If that is the case, Mr. Speaker, then we have an obligation to assist them. And it's not just a handout or be namby-pamby, but to get in there and to give clear direction that that kind of behaviour should not be tolerated. It's through the courts, Mr. Speaker, but it's also earlier on through support systems and the social networks that we have. Mr. Speaker, in applauding the passage of this legislation that will effectively protect animals who are unable to protect themselves, the question I ask of the government, will they guarantee that people throughout this country who are unable to protect themselves, for example, Mr. Speaker, the victims of accidents in this country who are currently on ACC, who are facing the possibility of removal off the ACC client list and the removal of their income and their means of existence because the Minister wants to balance his books. Well, Mr. Speaker, I expect the National Party to come back and make adjustments to the legislation and to tell the Minister of ACC that it is not right that he should punish people who are unable to protect themselves or ensure they have some form of income because they have been injured through no fault of their own. So let's not get too righteous about what a wonderful place Parliament is and how good the national government is in introducing animal welfare legislation if at the same time, through this country today, and I know down in my electorate on the 20th, on a Saturday, where 20 people who are supported for their existence by payments for ACC are going before a review individual, someone employed by ACC to cut the list down. They're going before that person and are likely to be totally exposed to the reality of no income. Mr. Speaker, those people who haven't been able to protect their income have not been looked after by this government. I acknowledge this piece of legislation protects animals who are unable to protect themselves, Mr. Speaker, but let's be consistent here. And I want to see from national government just as much care and compassion for people